Hi, everyone. Welcome. It's Monday, and we're excited to be with you today. My name is Jan Mercer-Doms. I'm the Vice President of U.S. Development with Mayshad Choice. We are an enterprise of brands under the larger Mayshad Group umbrella. We're a company for women, by women, champion equity for women, both professionally and personally, with our digital live stream event series, which you're a part of today, and our ongoing opportunities to stay connected and engaged to a fabulous group of diverse corporate female executives, business owners, and entrepreneurs. We are truly changing the way in which professional women network, engage, and form relationships together. We're thrilled and honored to present with you every Monday afternoon at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, our Dr. Risa Ryger show. Please, please, please make sure to stay connected with us. You may follow us and attend all of our other digital live events at joinmayshad.com, in addition to making sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is brought to you right now today. In addition to, we want to hear from you. So please submit all of your questions and thoughts during the course of the show. We are live streaming today, and our content will be available on our website after for further viewing. Thank you so much. We're so excited to be with Dr. Risa Ryger today, clinical psychologist and investor in the Mayshad Group. Welcome, Dr. Ryger.
Hi, Jan. It's great to see you.
It's great to see you as well. Today's conversation is going to be really interesting because for many of us, we're moving into not week 2, not week 3, but week 4 and week 5 of self-quarantine and self-isolation, social distancing. And with that comes so many different challenges as it pertains to things like it's spring and we all want to be outside and we're getting cabin fever. For how many of us is that true? And we're all raising our hands. And we also want to ensure that we're staying healthy, even though we may be experiencing the flattening of the curve. We also want to make sure that protecting ourselves, protecting our families, protecting our communities. And we know that there are many of us, counting over 22 million of us right now, that are also unemployed. So we're very eager to get out, resume life, and go back to work. With that comes some tensions. And we're going to talk today about some of those tensions as it pertains to social distancing from a psychological perspective. So, Dr. Risa Ryger, welcome to our show today.
Thank you, Jan. And as we're kicking off and going into this crucial topic at this time, I would just invite us for a moment to take a moment so that we can actually be here. And that means just taking a moment to check in with yourself. Perhaps we take a breath together. Shall we do that, Jan?
Let's do that. Sounds great. Now,
let's do that. Okay. And take a breath in. Follow your breath and let it out. One more time. Breath in and out, so that as we're present here, we can actually bring our presence with us and be here fully. If we're taking the time, and you're taking the time out of your busy schedule, and I know it is so busy right now, to be here, let's really be in it together, fully checked in with ourselves, so we can be here for ourselves and be here with each other as we're here in our community.
Thank you, Risa. I don't know about all of you out there, but as it gets to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here in the New York area on a Monday afternoon, given the fact that life has changed so dramatically, I very much look forward to those moments of breath and grounding moments with you, Risa, and the exercises that we always accompany as we close the days as well. So today, Dr. Ryger will be talking about the psychology of human behavior as the individual mind processes information, weighing what's right from wrong in a moment of time where everything seems to be a little bit more shooken up than usual, and what and how we determine courses of action, both for ourselves individually, and then as we think about the collectivity of our communities and our ecosystem and the world at large, and the consequences of individual behaviors that may be in conflict with the greater good, which we're seeing some of that right now. So Dr. Ryger, our first question to you is that many of us have created new ways to stay socially connected and engaged during this time. And we're engaging in what we may call pro-social behaviors by sharing, donating, volunteering. And whether or not individuals, many of us are making face masks for the medical community. We may be paying for catering for hospital healthcare workers, or FaceTiming with the elderly that are even more socially isolated than the rest of us. Many of us feel compelled to serve right now. And not to mention that many of us, and we'll be speaking to one of those healthcare professionals, an MD, very, very soon, we're also risking our lives to serve others. And by doing that, by working on the front lines and exposing ourselves to great harm in order to feel like we're giving back to the larger aspect of humanity as we think about it. Let's talk a little bit about the framework around pro-social behavior. And from a psychological lens, what are the drives and motivations of that? And why do we feel more compelled now and in times like this than in others to serve?
Jan, that's such a great kickoff question for today, and really an important one, and certainly one that starts with a great deal of breadth. And let's just take it back in time of who we are and who we are in relation to one another. And many years ago, there was an experiment called the still face experiment that was done with a researcher at Tronic. And that experiment went like this, and I think it really is foundational for partially understanding what pro-social behavior is and why we would be compelled, why we feel that it can be so important for us to engage in that. So basically, the experiment went like this. Baby's there, mom is sitting with baby in a room, and the baby is being expressive and being the baby. And mom has a still face. Mom is not responding to the baby. And what happens, and you can go on YouTube, I think you can see videos of this, is that you see this little tiny person become more and more distressed and beside themselves. And they'll keep trying and even be more, make even more attempts to be engaging with no response whatsoever from mom. And you see babies just lose it and start crying or give up. And it is one of the hardest things to sit through. It's short, but it's very hard. And then the mom comes out of it and comforts the baby. But as human beings, we are social beings, and we have social brains. And from our youngest ages, from our tiniest moments, we look to be in relationship. We look to be in interaction. We look for that feedback from others, and that's really an important component of pro-social behavior. And so that's one piece of it, is that we're social beings, we have social brains, we're social entities, and we want to be in relationship. Now, the other thing that what we know is that from very early on, that babies, little tiny humans, really want to help. And you can see them in pro-social behavior. And so we start to develop our moral compasses very early on in life. And, if anybody's interested, Kohlberg was the person who talked about the different developmental moral stages, and just really fast. The basic paradigm was this: that there's a pharmacy. Actually, it's not funny, but it's kind of an odd moment in time. Is that the example that's given? The paradigm is that there's a pharmacist who has a drug that can help people, and a man comes in and he needs the drug for his wife, and he doesn't have enough money for the drug. And so, depending on where you are in the developmentally, that people at different ages will respond differently. So there's a kind of a concrete, well, it's against the law, and that person will get into trouble if they steal it, to getting to the point where, well, there's a moral imperative to be able to have that drug, or an alternative is that, well, maybe there are other people who need that drug as much. So that there's differences as we develop as human beings in how we can perceive and look at the different facets of what morality can look like. Now, that's using one particular model. And then Carol Gilligan did work, and she was looking at moral perspective and moral development from a very different perspective, because she brought in the possibility that women, that girls, females, can experience morality along a different type of paradigm, which is more of a caring paradigm. And so it's looking at the social good. And so that, for example, in certain experiments where girls are playing and there are certain rules and that there's a problem, that girls will shift the rules in order to have cohesiveness and to have the play continue. Now, since that time, it's, things have shifted, and so there's more of a sense that both males and females are more in the same space on moral development, being able to take in caring and a greater social norm, along with the concept of justice. And so who we are morally is part of our internal compass, along with the social component of being human and having our social organ, our brain. And so when we put all of that together, what is our imperative as a human being? What is our what's our North Star as who we are as human beings and how we purport ourselves? How do we comport ourselves? How do we move in the world and really be consistent with who we are and how we can be of help?
Risa, thank you for that. And so many questions for you now. So, it's interesting you spoke about Carol Gilligan's work, and I'm wondering, from your experiences as we think about and kind of dissect this across genders, for what's happening right now as we think about how other humans are helping other human beings. Let's talk about the gender nuances of that. And then also, how does the ego play into that? So, for example, are we being 100% altruistic and 100% genuine in how we give? Or are there other benefits that come back to us as individuals because of the ways in which we give?
Well, different people have different kinds of resources available to them. And so that what seems to be more consistent with someone's giving pattern will also be reflective now. And frankly, at this point, that there can be all kinds of giving, and that we have, we have all different ways, and that doesn't make one thing valid and something else invalid, and that there's an appreciation of what can be given. So, for example, there can be people who can give money. There are people who have time, and so they step up. There are different kinds of neighborhood organizations and neighborhood chat rooms where someone who's back from college will just post and say, hey, I'm available. If you need me to pick up groceries for you, I will do that. I will be your wheels. And so people can step up in all kinds of ways. And then, of course, we have people who are on the front lines. And that's a different kind of stepping up where, as we kind of talked about together a little bit, which is that for people who choose to go into the healthcare profession, there's an internal calling. There's an internal sense of being able to help heal. And so this, at the moment, is one of the crucial aspects of what is needed. And people are stepping up in all sorts of ways and figuring out how to make it feasible. And even when feasibility means, and we've heard this before, sleeping in your car, getting a hotel room, being in another home, being away from your family, of trying to find some sort of balance point where you can continue doing what you're doing and being part of the greater good and being responsible and caring and part of the the fabric of your own home life in whatever way you can. And this is no small challenge.
Risa, let's talk a little bit about those guiding principles and the socially accepted norms of behavior and kind of the rules around which we organize our lives and live and lead. And when you think about pro-social behavior, there's also the sense of that that you're engaging in the service of others, but then there are also the societal boundaries by which you execute within that, right? And to protect and to nurture and to provide that trusting space, to hold that space. And as we're thinking about, particularly what's happening right now with the protests and with people not socially distancing and going to the beaches and et cetera, there's kind of this duality here of, we want life to get back to normal. We want to go back to being the social beings that we all are. We want to find compassion and for each other. And often that means not just doing things digitally in this sort of, two-dimensional world, but actually having that person in front of you. But as we live life right now, there are many constraints around that, and for good reason. So let's talk a bit about, why do you think that's happening? Is it just the change of seasons, or is it that we're month number 2 now and everyone's getting a little restless, or is there something more to what we see, particularly as it pertains to the protests that are happening nationally right now?
This is such a difficult and in many ways tragic time. And people are impacted in profound ways. And there are people who are losing their lives. There are people who are desperately ill. There are people who are losing their livelihood and have other people who are dependent upon them. And it's a very, very difficult space of how does this get negotiated and how does this get navigated at this point in time. And it behooves us to try to find, well, and this is the question of the moment of what do we need to do? We've been on this for a while. When are we at the tipping point that we can start to go back? What does that look like? And we're in a tremendous point of uncertainty, and we still don't have green lights, and we don't know what the green lights are going to look like. And there are people who are just at their their internal breaking points. And so the issue is, yes, you want to do that, but then by being in large groups of people and protesting, is it being counterproductive in terms of possibly infecting and reinfecting people? And so it's a tremendous dilemma. And and the idea that social distancing really works, we see it happening now, and we're seeing progress with that. The thing about the pandemic is that when there's been, when there's an issue, when there is let's say a car accident, people will come out of their cars and rush over to help. That it's something that you can see. It's tangible. You can see it. You can see that there's a problem. You can see that there's difficulty. We're fighting an entity that we can't see. And so oftentimes that becomes very difficult for people to really get a grasp of. And sometimes for people who haven't been affected and impacted by having those closest to them be affected by the disease and be suffering or perhaps lose their lives to the disease. So it's a tough spot of needing to contain, that sometimes the greater good, and oftentimes the greater good is actually your good as well. That the greater good is actually good for you as well. Even if you're someplace that isn't profoundly impacted at this point in time. And that one of the things that we know is that all it takes is someone, somewhere, to start spreading this. And then we see the ripple effect And it's hard to imagine if you're someplace that hasn't been, profoundly affected, of what this can look like, how quickly it can spread, and how vulnerable we can be as human beings to this.
Risa, it's interesting what you said about, that not being able to see the quote unquote enemy, right? Because when we think about those other moments in times where people often talk about the way in which people rallied together after something horrific happened, right? So when we think about 9/11, we think about the 2007, 2008 market crash, where millions of people in new home subdivisions were suddenly homeless and living underneath bridges. We talk about Hurricane Sandy or many other natural disasters that have happened in most recent history. There is a period in time which we see human compassion at such an incredible level, right? We see people from, those everyday acts of kindness to really going above and beyond to ensure that they felt like they had each other's backs from that humanistic perspective. And then sometimes we realize that, when life goes back to normal, we have short memory spans. We have much shorter attention spans, and behaviors go back to the way things were. Is there something particular in what's happening right now with the pandemic that you feel either we could learn from the past and become much better global citizens in the way that we respond to each other and practice compassion and empathy? Or are we subject to repeat the same mistakes? And what advice do you have for helping us get to a much better place on the other side of this? I know, huge question, but we have a lot of faith in you, Dr. Risa Ryger, for helping us solve this great mystery right now.
Well, Jan, I can't tell you how much I appreciate the faith that you have, and certainly, as is commensurate with this time, we don't step back. We move and we step in to do the best we can, and so I will do now by trying to answer this question. One thing is that for many of us, we don't know what going back really looks like. And so that what we do know is that it is not going to be, okay, New York, done. Okay, go back to your restaurants, go back to your celebrations and hug each other, go back to graduations and be all together and have your high school graduates be just like one mass of teenagers off into the next step of life. We know it's not going to be that. And so there's internally this wish that when this is done, like it's like going from, okay, you've been waiting at the red light and now it's a green light. And so now you can just step on the gas and go. And we know that that's not going to be the case. And we haven't had that experience yet. We haven't had that experience of something not being really, really done and being able to go back to what's familiar. And so, it goes back also to what we were saying before, is that when people go out and they're not practicing, it's appropriate physical distancing. I'm not even going to call it social distancing, because we can be socially very, very close. We just can't do it physically now, which is taking, giving our oxytocin a real hit, at the moment. But that even if if someone's thinking, well, the person I'm standing next to or going near isn't old and seems to be a healthy person, that they may be going back to someone who isn't. They may be going back to someone who really is immunocompromised. And so what you're doing, if you're not practicing physical distancing, may be impacting people in a way that you really don't want to. That you don't really want to do that. It's hard to remember that. So that I think that this transition in terms of I don't know what going back is going to mean. Maybe in some areas it really is going to be going back, but we don't know what that is going to look like as this disease keeps rolling out, and so we're not done.
So Risa, do you think in a way that also presents opportunity for us as human beings, as social human beings. Because again, when we go back and we think about in most recent history, those moments and times where there could be some sort of, on whatever level, some sort of comparison to what we're experiencing now, 9/11, natural disasters, the global market collapse. It was a moment in time, right? There was a finite period of time, either the tornado hits or the hurricane comes, or, or 9/11 happens. So because of that, do you think that also gives us more human capacity to continue practicing those random acts of kindness, to continue practicing pro-social behavior, to continue acting in a way that's philanthropic and nurturing and kind and giving to others? And wondering if there's an opportunity for us to do that, even through the digital lens by which we're all operating right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We really don't lose our opportunity to be and to exercise the best of who we are, and to develop more compassion, to develop more understanding, to develop more patience, to develop the moments where, even if it's not us at the moment, that we can extend an interest and a caring to be able to connect with someone else's experience, even when it's really not our own. And that we can go the distance. And one of the things that we're seeing is we're seeing in business, we're seeing in in companies that have developed. We've seen business who have closed what they're doing, and they're now manufacturing and figuring out how to make something that's needed and necessary at this point in time. We're seeing it in companies where these are profit companies, and they're also giving back. That you don't have to be a this or that. You can be this and that. You can be out there doing your thing, being in your business, and giving back. We always have the opportunity to be in both spots, and to take this forward into time.
Risa, it's interesting because when I think that, who are we in all of right now? And it's all of those people that are serving on the front line, no matter if it's your healthcare professionals, if it's your firefighters and EMT experts, if it's the people that are delivering your groceries and handing you your takeout through your car window, to the people that are checking out your groceries. And I'm wondering, particularly as we see, and we'll make sure to ask Dr. Katie the question as well when she comes on in a few minutes as our special guest today. But wondering, particularly for those medical professionals who, are very, very new in their careers, who haven't necessarily finished their residency or their rotations, and they're being put into those frontline positions, and the consequences and just the enormous experience that they're gaining within a very short period of time. And I'm sure that that's very, very scary, honestly, and very frightening for them too, as they're placed in those situations. And for other professionals like them, do you think that because of this, there'll be a moment in time where people rethink how they position their careers in service of others? Or is the calling to serve others so great that no matter what happens, if you really want to dedicate your life to serving others, you'll make that happen no matter what?
Jane, I think that really can go many different ways, because there are many ways of serving, and that this will come down to individual decisions. And so that people are thrown right in. It's not clear whether there's been a lot of, and I doubt it's, real. Well, how do you prepare for this? How do you prepare for going into a ward when people are all on ventilators? How does one prepare for that? And the answer is that you can't. And so that, for example, I've heard of a very seasoned nurse who is now she's on the front lines, she's in the hospital, and people are in rows of ventilators. And so this is someone who isn't a new person on the floor, but is someone very, very seasoned, and this has a human impact. And so I think that in order for people to be able to, or these first responders, whether new, which is a whole other experience, or seasoned, that people are given the opportunity, encouraged, and really do require that there's some sort of way of processing this. It's not that you're going to be going in and working during this pandemic and in this time of extraordinary crisis and then just be able to, kind of move back into what your practice, what your experience looked like yesterday. And so we need to give people an opportunity to process, to be human. There are a lot of us, on so much of a tinier level, those situations where you've got something and you do it and you just power through it till you can get to vacation or whatever it is. And then when that happens, immediately, you get sick or something else happens. You power through, you do what you need to do and you power through and you find whatever those resources are. And as soon as you don't need it, have that letdown, and you need a moment to be able to, and I say moment more symbolically, whatever that moment is, to be able to really take stock of what it is that happened, how we deal with it, how we process it, and that it's not just, okay, next day and hop back in. And people really will need support and respect and the same kind of, clapping for people who are going in every day to help, to also clap for them, to take what they need in order to be able to come to grips with their own experiences and the level of trauma of what they've been exposed to.
Risa, that's really interesting. And in our conversations with the women that are part of the Mayshad ecosystem, and our network spans globally. And it's interesting because, we see women at so many different stages where you may feel hope and light and vision one day, and you may be in the most innovative spaces in times of intellectual thought, in the sense of, maybe a project you're working on or how you're going to stay fresh and relevant and current or whatever it is. And then the next day, something happens to a friend or a relative or a colleague. And so there's an emotional roller coaster for everyone because we're all at different stages of coming to terms with what's happening. And one step forward and 5 steps back sometimes. And I'm wondering if, because of what you're saying, which is the sheer amount of energy that it takes to muster the courage to keep going, to your point, will we ultimately become, I guess you could maybe say, pickier in the way in which we select those people that we do want in our universe or our sphere or our networks or in our tribes? And are we also, in a way, using this time to weed out maybe some of that other negative energy that from a psychological perspective, we just don't find to be of value anymore? So will we come out of this thinking more clearly about the quality of our relationships instead of just the massive amounts of people that we have in our universe on an average day?
That certainly is an option, and getting clarity about, who are the people who, when we're with them, not every moment, everybody has their moments, right? But that, who are the people when we're with them, that there's something that feels very connected with, and people who are neutral and people who that are difficult to be around. And I think one of the important questions is to understand and really allow oneself to say, on a bottom line level, is this someone who has my best interest at heart? What is the context of this human being? I mean, certainly when we're, when people are at work and they have different roles, they can be, they're fighting on different sides, whether it's, for all sorts of things, legally or in different sorts of roles. But in our personal relationships, to be able to ask ourselves, is this someone who wishes me well on a bottom line level? And we have we have questions to ask ourselves. And we can use this time to reevaluate, and we can use this time to reevaluate for ourselves really what's important. And I don't mean this in a very light way. I mean it in a really profound way. And then if we get this understanding now and we come to more clarity now, how do we want to implement that clarity going forward? Now, it may be, to your point, Jan, that there are people that we need to be in connection with. We need to have, some form of relationship with it. But what we can do, and what is really within our control, and what we can do, is we can decide and we can channel and have impact on our own reactions to that person. So that even if there's someone who we feel is a drain or is not caring, that we can make determinations for ourselves of how much we want to be affected and have our control, our reactions, if you want to call it our power or emotionality, affected by someone who we don't feel is a person that we really want to have in our space. So that there are lots of things that we can do. And we do have control of that. And so where we can, go for it and exercise it for ourselves and develop that for ourselves.
One more question before we bring our guest speaker on. Sure. Risa, go ahead.
Before we move on, there is one more thing we need to do.
Oh, but there are actually two more things we need to do.
In that case, one.
Let me manage one, and I'll give you the other one. How about that?
Okay. Let's go.
So it's interesting from the Mayshad perspective, and the entire list of speaking points that we've been taking part in today is brought to you by the cohesive nature of the Mayshad team, because right now we're all, of course, remote working in very different spaces and places. So right now we have a team member in Greece, we have a team member in Morocco, we have a team member in Vidai, we have a team member on the Upper East Side, we have I'm in Westchester County, and we have a team member who's in the South right now. So we have a broad array of different perspectives and different experiences as we're continuing the remote work world in which we're all living right now. But it's interesting when we think about some of the other here we have so many state distinctions between social distancing and how we're thinking about just interacting and kind of the social aspect of life. But in many other countries, behavior and the way in which people exhibit daily freedoms now is very constricted to help flatten the curve even faster in their respective countries. And so, we're speaking with one team member, and the government has set up a system by which you text when you want to go outside. And they do that to be able to monitor the number of people who are outside at any given point in time. So it's not seen to be a social control mechanism by which we think of Big Brother watching you, but it's more just around ensuring that all citizens are safe and well protected and healthy, right? Whereas in different parts of the United States, it's a challenge to keep people 6 feet apart from each other in a line in Trader Joe's in Brooklyn, for example. Or it's a challenge to ensure that people are wearing masks. And so there's this whole sort of range of wide behaviors. I'm wondering, Risa, from your perspective, even though, we hear that we're flattening the curve in many parts of the United States, but we know that could backtrack very quickly, right? And so final words of advice on the social distancing topic from your perspective, in the sense of what could we really learn from other countries right now? And are there ways in which we could implement, even if our government doesn't, impose such restrictions on us, what as individuals could we learn how to do differently and better during this time?
Well, Jan, this step number one in this question really moves us into the last piece that we're going to talk about together before we bring Dr. Katie in, and if we can all participate in this, which is that at this time, it's really important for us, maybe even more so than ever, to really get an understanding of who and how we define who is us and who is them. And so in order to be able to have people, being, texting and seeing if they can go and not go, that there's a sense that it's us and there's an us. And so now it behooves us tremendously to be clear of who is our us, who is our us. And when it's us, what is it that we feel? What do we experience differently? And so what I would invite us all to do is to just participate in this experience. And I would ask you all kindly to close your eyes and just listen and notice what it is that you feel. What do you experience? See what arises inside of you. And I'm just going to say some things. Them. 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 Us. 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 Notice your experience. And if you can take a moment now and open your eyes. And what did that feel like? What did that feel like? What did you experience inside of yourself when you heard them? What was different when you heard us? And as we segue to Dr. Katie, who's been extraordinarily talking about exercise and patience, waiting to come on, that think about your experience of us, of them, and us, and what you felt. And now think about first responders. Who is their them? Who is their us? That first responders, when someone comes into their care, they're all us. And so I'd love some feedback from people who are part of our community here today. And let us know what this experience was like. You can, my email's on the, it can be found, it's on Mayshad, and let us know. Let Mayshad know, let me know. And this is really important.
And for everyone out there with us today, please, please, please feel free to submit your responses on the live YouTube stream, as well as your questions that we'll take in the last few minutes of today's show. This is such a great segue to introduce Dr. Katie. Dr. Katie, welcome. Catherine Takayasu, MD, is an integrative medicine doctor with a passion for plant-based forward cooking. And Dr. Katie, you have the most amazing website and your recipes are incredible. Thank you so much for developing that, number one. Very much focused on lifestyle balance. Katie blends Western medicine with acupuncture, botanical, and mind-body medicine to holistically treat her clients and patients. We're honored to have Katie join us here today. And Katie, you and I met recently, and your world has changed dramatically in the last 2 weeks of us being introduced to each other. So thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day, as we can see that you're in a hospital right now working the front lines. And would love to get your experience of what's happening now. How has your practice and the work that you've done to date informed what you're doing now? And then we'll have a conversation with Dr. Risa. Welcome, Katie.
Thank you so much. This is really such a joy to be here, and a nice little departure from my day. So it's nice to connect with all of you. So my regular practice is at the Center for Integrative Medicine and Wellness at Stanford Hospital, which is a typical outpatient practice, but we provide care that's a little bit outside the norm, meaning that we do things like acupuncture and teaching patients about nutrition and all of the important things in our lifestyle balance. And a couple of weeks ago, our whole medical staff was approached by the administration about coming in to the ICU specifically and providing care to the team, to the patients here, along with the team that's already in place. And at first, when I got that email, I had this sinking feeling in my gut, like, oh my God, like, what am I getting myself into? And I texted my husband, and the question basically was, how can I not say yes? And when I think about the reason that I did say yes, it comes back to this idea that I was really scared. I genuinely was scared about what I was going to see, what I would be faced with, about infection risk for my family, for myself, lots of unknowns. But ultimately, it came down to this feeling of, if I don't say yes, will I not do my duty to humanity? And will I look back on this time in another, 5, 10, 15 years and just wonder what I could have done? And I think it's really important to recognize that all of us in our own lives have this ability to, sort of that I could. And I wanted to make sure that I was doing that. And so now I'm in the ICU, I'm supporting the team. I'm basically functioning like a resident or an intern, which is quite humbling, and actually very good. So that someone, smarter than I am is making the big decisions, but I'm helping to execute the tasks. And what I see here is a lot of really sick patients. And they're sick because of many comorbidities and medical problems that they've had prior to coming in. It's not really the 35-year-old who's really totally totally healthy. We're seeing people who have major medical issues. But the care is very thoughtful. And the people who are really doing the good work are our nurses and our respiratory therapists, who are in the rooms all day long, exposed, who are providing like the hands-on care. The care that I'm providing is it's thoughtful, but it's very cerebral, and it's decision making. But there are people who are really truly on the front lines, and so I don't want to minimize my own experience, but also want to explain that there are people who are doing even more, and for those people, I'm really grateful.
Risa, I'll invite you to join in the conversation as well as we talk more with Dr. Katie. Dr. Katie, it's as Risa was sharing some of her wisdom with us and expertise, I couldn't help but think about, some of the conversations you and I have had so far already, just around, what does going back look like from a healthcare perspective, and also fighting an entity that we can't really see, right? But from your perspective, you're actually seeing it, right? Like you see it in the way in which it manifests itself. Outside of just, remote work and some of the other things and getting groceries and finding toilet paper and et cetera, et cetera. So I'm wondering, if you could share a bit with us about how you envision and kind of define who and what the enemy is. And could that help us in the sense of how we actually conceptualize what's going on right now?
Absolutely. I think, prior to coming into the ICU, I didn't really understand what the situation was because I was sort of taking it in from the lens of the outpatient doctor. And when I got in here, what I'm seeing are really, really sick patients who are on ventilators, who are getting literally the kitchen sink thrown at them in an attempt to make them breathe better. We're seeing patients that instead of ventilating, meaning like having a tube down their throat to help them breathe, instead of being face up, they're actually in a prone, meaning face down position, because that helps for them to get more oxygen to their lungs. We're seeing tons of medicines used, lots of lines. Everybody is in a mask all day long. I'm not in one right now because I'm in an open space. But the nurses and the respiratory therapists are spending almost the entire day in complete protective equipment. And, we're seeing a lot of really sad things. one of the things our hospital is doing, which I think is so cool, is that when someone gets discharged who's had a diagnosis of COVID-19, they're playing Here Comes the Sun from the Beatles. And but that's contrasted with the overhead, Code Blue. And so there's this dichotomy, and we talked a little bit before we started today about this duality of optimism and also like the frank, idea that this is awful. And, when you're fighting an enemy that's literally, you could fit 300 of on the size of a human hair, it's really hard to understand like what a virus really is. And so I think that, it's hard to conceptualize.
Dr. Katie, Risa and I had a conversation before the show today around just, as a professional, how you reconcile it, but then at a personal level, how are you reconciling it? Interested to hear more just from your own personal perspective and what this means to you right now.
I think this is going to be one of the defining moments of my career. It's going to be just like many of the other things that our nation has been through in terms of tragedy, which you had highlighted earlier. And I think it's going to be, it's going to change a lot of things for the better. One thing that's really come out of this that will be amazing is the fact that telehealth has really stepped up, and we're now able to offer so many more services than we were before. I think we're going to think so much more carefully about the way that we use things like PPE, personal protective equipment, and not be so blasé about it. I remember in residency when we go into rooms with someone who had, flu or something else, and we would just sort of all gown up and then just sort of take it off and throw it away. And now we're recycling masks and we're cleaning them because we don't have enough N95s in size small to go around. And so I think there's going to be a lot of changes going forward about how we interact with our patients and what we consider to be safe or not safe. But that said, I also think that we are going to get back to a time when we live mostly normal, and that we will get back to a time when we see our physicians and, our families the way that we have before, maybe with slight nuances, but mostly normal. And I think accepting that normality will be good.
Dr. Risa, do you have questions?
Dr. Katie, I'm wondering, what is it like for you when you go home and making that transition? What transition to home, and what is it that, if you will, feels comfortable about helping you in that transition and really be able to connect again life outside the hospital and what you've seen during the course of the day?
I'll tell you what, when I first came home from the ICU, the first day I had a very specific procedure about like how to take my shoes off, like where to leave my clothes. Like my husband and I had it all figured out so that no one in my house would be exposed. But after I took that first shower, post taking off all of my stuff, I put on my exercise clothes, and my kids, I have 7-year-old twin boys, wanted to go outside and ride bikes. And I remember getting on my bike and thinking, if I could only ever just ride my bike and watch my boys go down the street ever again, like that would be a great day. And I think what this experience has taught me is that there are so many things that I just obviously take for granted, like taking a breath on my own when I want during my yoga class. Those kinds of experiences, this experience has made me value those experiences even more. And I think that it always reminds me that it's so important that we come back to those 4 things in my practice and what I teach patients that are most important, which is, it's really important that we eat great food that's really nutritious and nutrient dense and mostly plants. It's important that we move our bodies every day and that we attend to the need for physical activity, and that we do the very best that we can to sleep every night and not stay up late and do things to our sleep schedule that make it impossible for us to rest. And then it's obviously really important that we attend to our spiritual self. And so as I manage all of this myself, I'm doing those 4 things. And when patients ask me, well, what supplements are you taking? What are you doing to really improve your immune system? I kind of joke that I've been prepping my immune system for this my entire life. And I've been homing in on these lifestyle choices for the last very intently for the last 7 to 10 years, because it's so important, and it does help my body to function the best that it can.
Hey, thank you so much for sharing that with us, and to also put in the paradigm that self-care is not self-indulgence. Thank you.
Absolutely.
We have a whole list of questions from our audience, so we'll get started, and these will feel free, Dr. Risa and Dr. Katie, to respond. Okay, so this is such an interesting question. When systematic behaviors and institutionalized systematic behaviors, so things like long lines at airports post-travel ban, or groups of people who are not social distancing in public places, or in when we're seeing frontline workers who aren't served with protective gear. Within the ideology of pro-social behavior, like, how do we say when enough is enough? Meaning, how do we reconcile for us when we're told to behave in a certain way to protect ourselves and protect others, but then there are other institutions that aren't doing it for those that they are so supposed to be protecting the most, if that makes sense. So when we looked at, for example, after the travel ban came into effect, long lines at the airports waiting to get back into the country when people were waiting for the health screens, right? Some people waiting 7 to 10 hours. Or when you see frontline workers at grocery stores that have not been given protective gear by their employers, right? So there's this conflict, as I understand the question, that there's this breaking point of being told what we're supposed to do, but then also those organizations, companies, institutions not protecting us as they're the ones who are actually telling us what to do. And wanted to get your feedback and your comments on that.
I'm going to defer to Dr. Risa, only because that's a little bit more outside the scope of my my psychology knowledge.
Okay. So it's inconceivable. I mean, we expect a certain amount of consistency, and what happens? I think the question, Jan, is what happens when we don't see that happen?
Exactly. What happens when we don't see it happening, and then also when we work for a salary via companies that are supposed to be protecting us, and then they're not protecting us. So Dr. Katie, it could be, the lack of the right hospital equipment to be able to protect frontline workers, or even simple things like masks in grocery stores, or when, the travel ban was supposed to be able to protect us, but yet it caused more risk of infection through the long lines. Like, how, from a psychological perspective, do we reconcile all of that in our minds and yet just keep going and keep going and keep going?
Well, there are some things that just aren't reconcilable. And there are some things that don't make sense. And we are in a tremendous time of ambiguity and a lot of contrary information and a tremendous time of uncertainty. And I think that when we see that divide between what can be expected, what should be expected, and what's not happening, I mean, as individuals, we have certain decisions that we can make about our behavior, about if we see that there are people who are not being properly, protected, and they're in the supermarket as cashiers and people who are handling food. We can certainly talk to store managers. There are things that we can do. We can make decisions for ourselves, and that there isn't a kind of following through. And so I think that we see a lot of this, and sometimes we're incredulous about it. And I don't know that there's necessarily going to be a reconciliation of that. I don't think that we can reconcile that, but be clear about this should be happening, and it is really not happening. And so there may not be a reconciliation about that. Other than, people want to come to their jobs. They want to do the best that they can. They want to be able to serve. They need to be able to take care of their families. And at the same time, that this is really not okay.
The next question gets at something that's near and dear to all of our hearts, and that is our digital devices. And it was interesting because I'll add a little bit here, then I'll get to the question. Before COVID-19, there was so much discussion and debate around how unhealthy it is to be so tied to our digital devices 24/7, from our tablets to our phones to our laptops to just the way in which we text, and how texting has replaced phone calls, and et cetera, et cetera. So, which is a great segue now into the question from our audience. Now that we're in COVID-19, can text messaging actually increase empathy and pro-social behavior and the way in which we communicate with each other as human beings? And if so, how is that different now than what we experienced before, pre-COVID?
My inclination is yes. In fact, I had a text today from a colleague, a good, close friend of mine, who is also on the front lines, and she said, because I can't talk to you, I'm texting you my positive vibes today. And that kind of thing just made my day, right? Just the fact that someone is thinking of me. And it's been my policy, because I think that we're all sort of tapped into each other at a deeper place and on a deeper level, that if someone crosses my mind, over the course of the day, whether it's a patient or a friend or a family member, I tend to just either reach out with a text message or an email, or if I have a chance, I'll call them on the way, home from work or whatever. And they'll say something like, "Oh, I was just thinking about you too." And I don't think that's coincidence. And so tapping into that inkling that you have in your heart and actually actioning it is probably really important to the universal good. And so I would encourage everybody to do that, whether in whatever form it is.
And do you feel like that has more significance and more meaning right now? So the text message, Dr. Katie, that you received today from your colleague, would it have had the same impact before? And what are those special things about this moment in time now that after we go back to whatever the new normal becomes, that we can carry with us, so that text message in the future may be just as something as important to you then as it does now?
I think we're all becoming crystal clear about what was really important to us. And just as I was riding the bike, after my children, after doing my first ICU shift and thinking like, I just want to be able to breathe and ride my bike, it became really crystal clear to me, like, what truly is important. And I think that the communication, the contact that we have with others in whatever form it is, to me is life-giving. And I'm going to do everything in my power going forward to make sure that I'm expressing the way that I feel every day, so that everybody is clear about the way that I feel about them or the way that they feel about me, so that so we can go forward from this in a better way. And so I think we're all getting a little bit clearer this whole time. And hopefully we'll be able to take that clarity with us going forward and actually, act upon it, right? Because it's not enough just to sort of think about something. Like, we actually have to do something about it. And taking our thoughts into action is huge. And I think this is a crystallized, clear time of taking thought into action.
Thank you, Dr. Katie, for that. This is a really interesting question. It speaks to giving and taking. And how can we learn right now in this moment in time to take as much as we're learning to give? Because so much of our conversation today is around giving and humanity and philanthropic behaviors and just, being a better human being. But then let's face it, this is also a moment in time where it's actually important, if you need to ask for help, to ask for help. Right. And so what can we learn about that just in this? And particularly as we know, women have a harder time asking for help anyway. Dr. Ryger, your thoughts?
Yes. Women are generally, do you need help? I'm happy to help you. Oh, I could help you with that. Oh, no, I've got it. It's okay. And so is on a personal note, I came to the realization, that it's very important to allow someone to give. Not only to recognize that you need the help, and that's very important, but it's also important to allow someone to give. And when we put up obstacles, make them jump through hoops, a ring of fire to be able to give to you, by the time they give to you and you accept it, it's exhausting. It's just exhausting. And so when we can connect with the part of us that gives, and also connect with our own humanity, that we have needs, and that there are other people who genuinely do want to help and want to give, and our internal and personal responsibility is to allow someone to give in a gracious and an appreciative way, and that we are allowing that to happen by making a space to receive. And this is a wonderful time to practice both the giving and the receiving.
Thank you, Risa. Dr. Katie, thank you so much for being with us here today. We cannot tell you how lucky we are to have you, and thank you so much for the work that you're doing each and every day. We really admire and respect what you're doing to as your part in giving and helping to ensure that those who come to your hospital are having the best experience possible as they recover from COVID-19. Dr. Risa Ryger, thank you so much for being with us here. We've gone over on time. I know that we could actually probably continue this conversation for hours, which I would love to do, but we also want to make sure that we're being respectful to all of our viewers out there today as well. Please, everyone, stay tuned for the rest of our programming this week. Tomorrow at 4 Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m., we have our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion series. Monday afternoons at 3 p.m. Last week, we launched our workshop series. We have another exciting workshop planned for you on Wednesday. Thursday at 11 a.m. is our Women in Money series. And please, please, please make sure to come back next Monday at 4 p.m. for our show with Dr. Risa Ryger. Thank you, everyone. Please visit joinmayshad.com, where you can learn more about our membership benefits and how you can also give and receive as well to our larger ecosystem of incredibly highly accomplished corporate executive women, female founders, and business owners. I'm Jan Mercer-Dahms, Vice President of U.S. Development for Mayshad Choice. Thank you so much. See you next time.